Well, radical politicians last week launched the biggest coordinated attack on parents' rights and religious freedom in Australia's history. If those behind this attack get their way, Christian and religious schools are to be forced to employ role models for children who support wacky and harmful LGBTIQA+ ideologies. Parents will be powerless, and it will end the authentic Christian and religious schooling in Australia. Homeschooling might provide a shelter, but as I'll explain later, no one is safe from the march of the rainbow flag and the totalitarian politics it carries. Now, since same-sex marriage was introduced in 2017, parents and schools have been left vulnerable to relentless, unfair public demonisation from LGBTIQA+ political activists and from politicians from Labor, the Greens, the Teals and the Liberal Party's powerful left faction. Last week's attack was launched by the Labor's Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, who tabled in Parliament an Australian Law Reform Commission report which recommended stripping religious schools of legal protections which allow them to employ staff who share their ethos. Now, a Christian school has to be able to employ staff who believe in what the school and what the parent community believes. That's just a basic tenet of freedom, but that's to be stripped under this radical proposal that Dreyfus has tabled. The title of his report is called Maximising the Realisation of Human Rights, Religious Educational Institutions and Anti-Discrimination Laws. And this title is distinctly Orwellian. Now, that's because rather than maximising the realisation of human rights, this report trashes parents' human rights to educate their children in the values of their religion, a key principle Australia has signed up to in international law, which I'll come to in a moment. Now, in this mad moment of history, if elites like Mark Dreyfus tell us something to be true, be sure the opposite is the case. The Albanese government, which through Dreyfus commissioned the ALRC report, wants schools to be forced to employ people who are opposed to their parent community's views on marriage and the science of gender. The irony of crucifying Christian schools in the lead up to Easter is lost on the Albanese government. Now, Dreyfus is not what Joseph Stalin might have once called a useful idiot for a nefarious cause. He is a genuine spear carrier, gladly doing the bidding of same-sex marriage activists who, since the law changed in 2017, have waged a relentless political campaign against Christian schools. Dreyfus's ALRC recommendations give no quarter to parents and school communities who want to shield their children from radical ideas like ones that say gender can be changed with puberty blockers and surgery, or that gender diversity no longer matters in marriage, i.e. that mums and dads don't matter. The ALRC report takes the false and pernicious view that religious schools are inherently harmful and that parents' concerns for their moral and religious education of their children must go to the back of the bus. Now, it's more important to Dreyfus that a teacher in a Christian school who dresses in kink and attends a bestiality-themed fetish party at a weekend Pride event, like that advertised by Sydney World Pride last year and funded by the Liberal Party, I kid you not, that such a person must be allowed to keep his job at a Christian school. An advocate of radical LGBTIQA+ gender ideology must be allowed to teach your children or grandchildren in the Christian school that you choose to send them to. The school community must be powerless to do anything about this. But the attacks on Christian and religious schooling are not just coming from Canberra. In what can only be seen as a coordinated attack by LGBTIQA+ political activists, the Queensland Labor government recently introduced changes to its Anti-Discrimination Act, which also strips schools at a state level of their ability to uphold a Christian ethos. Last week I mentioned Pat Byrne and Terry Kelleher's excellent but chilling analysis of this draconian law, which they published in News Weekly. I recommend you look it up and have a read of it. Christian schools are caught up in a pincer movement from state and federal Labor, egged on by taxpayer-funded law reform commissions that are pushing LGBTIQA+ politics. But tolerance is not a virtue of the love is love political crowd. Queensland Labor's changes also attack free speech, ensuring that where there is a clash, like in Mark Dreyfus's ALAC report, LGBTIQA+ political ideology must prevail over free speech every time. Now, this has been brewing for years, but it is all out in the open now. They are not even trying to hide it anymore. Politicians have now completely disregarded the work of some of the nation's most eminent legal academics, like Professor Patrick Parkinson, who for the past decade or more have proposed ways to make reasonable accommodations so that there can be tolerance for both LGBTIQA+ political aspirations and accommodations that preserve the rights of parents, the rights of freedom of speech and the rights of freedom of religion. But make no mistake, these rights, these freedoms, freedoms of speech, freedom of religion, are being crushed in this country under the rainbow political flag, regardless of what the academics say. Again, the Queensland Liberal National Party leadership is missing in action, leaving religious schools and individuals to fend for themselves in the public square against hostile LGBTIQA+ political activists and a media that is largely in their pocket. Back in Canberra, Dreyfus and the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, say they are about protecting both LGBTIQA+ rights and the right of schools to create a community of faith. Now, this is a disingenuous lie. To teach differently to the new LGBTIQA+ orthodoxy or to create a school community which lives out mainstream values is to risk massive legal action in what Christian Schools Australia says will be a lawyer's picnic. Risk-averse and worried about their assets, many Christian school board members will be wondering whether they should simply compromise with LGBTIQA+ views on marriage and children's gender rather than protect their children from the harms of the ideology. Pray that they hold the line. This is a day for Daniels with the courage to stand in the lion's den, come what may. Now, in a blistering media release last week, Australia's 3 Christian schools groups came out swinging against Dreyfus and his ALRC report. They said it was a direct attack on faith and freedom of belief in Australia. Australian Association of Christian Schools Executive Officer Vanessa Cheng said this: if these ALRC recommendations are adopted, it means the government can tell Christian schools who we can employ, what we can believe and teach, end quote. Christian Schools Australia Director of Public Policy Mark Spencer said, hundreds of thousands of Australian parents choose to send their children to faith-based schools because they value this type of education. They enrol their children knowing that our teachers and staff are aligned with our beliefs and that students will be taught according to our beliefs. If these recommendations are adopted, that's the ALRC's recommendations, parents would lose this right and the government has no right to remove this choice, end quote. He said it was important that the government understands, again, quote, Christian schools are communities of faith where Christian teachers and staff engage with students from a faith perspective both inside and outside the classroom and are expected to be available for Christian devotion, prayer and support. A staff member who doesn't share or support our beliefs cannot effectively teach our beliefs or support students according to our beliefs, end quote. Now, Dreyfus and Albanese say they can accommodate LGBTIQA+ demands and religious freedom, which is clearly a nonsense. Dreyfus told the Parliament the following: the government is seeking an enduring solution that strengthens protections for all of us, students, teachers and people of faith. Now, as I said before, this is a disingenuous fantasy from an Attorney General who has been well briefed by Christian legal academics over many years, but has chosen to side with LGBTIQA+ political activists. Dreyfus, Albanese and the Queensland Premier Stephen Miles pretend that Article 18.4 of the United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, does not even exist, even though Australia is a signatory. The ICCPR states, and I quote, the states parties to the present covenant undertake to have respect for the liberty of parents and, when applicable, legal guardians, to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions, end quote. Now, that promise has been conveniently swept aside because it doesn't suit the radical left's agenda to control the education of your children. The LGBTIQA+ political movement will not tolerate a solution which leaves parents and Christian schools free to teach mainstream views on marriage and gender. And if anyone thinks they will stop with crushing Christian and religious schools, they are naive. This is just the beginning of their culture war. Churches are next. But history shows there will always be dissidents governments try to snuff out. History shows that there will always be dissidents when governments try to snuff out Christianity and its love for marriage and family. This is a time for dissidents to live out a better vision of human flourishing, demonstrating the truth, goodness and beauty of marriage and family. It's time to pick up the tools of democracy and get involved in politics before it's too late.